Good analysis. We'll talk more about the running back committee situation later on in this podcast, but let's move on to the Madden curse question. Do we think that Megatron is going to, quote-unquote, defeat the Madden curse? Will he be the one that will survive the Madden curse?
All right, well, first off, what I have to say about Calvin Johnson is this. I haven't seen a receiver in a long time that he's had his level of skill. He's just unstoppable. And as long as Matt Stafford, Stafford stays healthy, I see no reason why he shouldn't repeat. He's an amazing receiver. He has a good quarterback throwing to him. Good pieces around him. I think that he has the if anyone can beat the Madden curse, I think Calvin Johnson's a good candidate. However, I am an avid believer in the Madden curse. I do not doubt its power at all. I think that blaspheming against the Madden curse is a good way to get Calvin Johnson into injured reserve. So what I'm going to say is this. I think that Calvin has a Drew Brees-like Madden curse year. I think that either Matt Stafford gets hurt or he has some sort of injury that limits him, and it's going to be like he's still good, but he's not at his normal levels. I think maybe you see a couple 100 yards less this year, or maybe less touchdowns, but he's not going to be completely useless or out of the league.
I still think he's arguably the best receiver in the league right now.
No question.
No argument.
No, I think Prez said, if anyone is going to defeat the Madden curse, it's going to have to be someone who's as freakishly athletic as this guy is. I mean, he's an absolute monster. I guess the argument that to make if you think the Madden curse will defeat him is the history of what the Madden curse has done to a lot of other really talented guys who have been on that cover. But there is some precedent to say that he won't just break his leg in some horrific accident week 2. He could have a Larry Fitz type of a year where Larry Fitz was shared a cover.
Yeah, but he only shared the cover.
He shared a cover.
So he got half of the damage.
Well, perhaps. But
I agree with that. Plus, Troy got a good chunk of that too because he was out for the whole season.
That is true. That is true. But
he might have got 25%.
Nevertheless, his face was on the cover, and he didn't have some horrific injury. He just had some terrible quarterback throwing to him, if I remember correctly. Or is that
big drop in production, like 400, 500 yards?
That's what I could see happening.
And I think part of the thing about that is when you're on the Madden covers, it means that you're at the top of your game. And football is such a competitive thing that it's so hard to remain dominant for more than a year at a time, just because there's so many other good talents. You're going to get more attention on you, and he plays in a division where there are a couple of physical defenses like the Bears, and certainly the Packers will get in there and mix it up with him. And it just and also with Stafford being a little bit injury prone. So yeah, I mean there's a lot of risk for a drop off in production, but you certainly don't count on some, like I said, horrific leg injury, and I wouldn't wish on anyone. I just think that it's definitely a powerful thing, that Madden curse. So just watch out, be a little buyer beware, I would say.
Well said. With that said, I'm probably going to draft him and probably crying to you guys in week 6. So,
all right,
we'll see. All right, on to the next question. This has been a serious issue this year. All these players getting arrested for whether it's DUIs or I don't know, hood rat things with their friends. I don't know. But how do you think this affects draft status for these Marshawn Lynch's and Dez Bryant's and anybody else that's been arrested? Justin Blackmon.
Well, I gotta tell you, I mean, guys like Marshawn Lynch, I think Kenny Britt was one, Dez Bryant.
Yeah, Kenny Britt.
These are guys that they're not just scrub guys. You're going to be paying decent chunks of your auction dollars or decent draft picks for. So you gotta just watch the news, and watch to see if what's going on with the courts. And you also have to be aware that Roger Goodell's the sheriff out there right now. He doesn't take any BS from anyone. He will, serve out some suspensions if he feels the need. So you definitely want to be a little bit buyer beware. I definitely think it devalues them. You're probably going to not want to take these guys at their projected draft picks. You'd probably want to shave off, for Dez Bryant, maybe you shave off a few dollars off his auction value, maybe, $5 to $8 worth of, off his auction value, and then maybe take him, a few runs later. Same thing for Kenny Britt. Marshawn Lynch, this is so disappointing because that was a guy who, in my mind, could have been one of a good running back simply because he had a breakout year and certainly didn't have a lot of competition in the backfield, which is pretty rare nowadays. So definitely, my best advice is just be buyer beware. keep track of the news on these guys, and if you really think that Roger Goodell is going to have a reason to suspend these guys or punish them in some way, he's probably going to do it. So just be careful if you're planning on drafting these guys, because they're going to have some baggage, and you're possibly going to lose some weeks.
Well said.
All right, so basically, in terms of whether how that affects their value, I don't have too much to add, and to add them in terms of obviously it's going to devalue them. What I'd probably give is just a little food for thought in terms of how you might want to go about drafting them, the kind of the logic you want to attach to it. What I'd do if I were you and you're really looking at somebody like a Dez Bryant or a Marshawn Lynch is I would just look at past precedent. I'd go back and see exactly what kind of stuff, what kind of damage, that Roger Goodell docked some players who got DUIs in the past.
Right.
And how many game suspension, if it's month suspension, 2-game suspension, and just kind of adjust your values for that. If Dez Bryant is worth $25 in this year's auction draft, and he's going to miss a fifth of the season, then you shouldn't be paying more for him than 2021. Because he's not going to be worth 25 anymore. He's
right.
Missing half a season. You're going to miss. If he's missing a fifth of the season, you're missing a fifth of his production. So you got to look at it in a very business-like, very straightforward sense in terms of how much you're getting for him and how much you aren't. Now, I would actually devalue that even more because it's being out of the loop, being out of the out of the game, not with the team for those 2 weeks or 3 weeks. So that's going to take him out of the game plan a little bit. So maybe $1 or $2 more depending on how much he's worth, but. Whether I think you shouldn't draft those guys, I think what you should look for is actually trying to get those guys at a steal.
Right.
Someone like Dez Bryant, he might be worth $23, $24, and you find out that everyone in your league is avoiding him like the plague, and you get him for $10, then he's definitely worth that $10. By far, he's probably worth 18 if he was going for 25. So. Keep that in mind and actually keep those guys on the lookout for steals. I wouldn't take too many of them because you don't want to have
a team of convicts.
You don't want to have your team loaded up with people who aren't going to play for the first 2-3 weeks,
right?
Because it'll be kind of tough to win. It's kind of guaranteed losses, but keep your eye out for them, but make sure you adjust your values accordingly.
Just use your logic, and I think he makes a good point that a lot of times these are where you can have some value for yourself, and if you're in a keeper league where these values sort of hold up for the next season, that could be another reason they try to pick up a guy like this.
Right. I'd also like a Dez Bryant case. Maybe you're gonna pick up a Laurent Robinson to because his projection is going to go somewhere, right?
Laurent Robinson's actually in Jacksonville now, though.
Is he really?
Yes.
Yeah,
I missed that. All right. Never mind. Well, but a person like that, you know what I mean?
Right. The logic's sound. Obviously Dez Bryant missing a couple weeks is going to add a little bit of value to Miles Austin and even Jason Witten. But, so that's something to keep in mind. It's a good point.
Okay.
Noted. Anyways, what did we hit? Okay, so then... speaking of... penalties. How about the bounty scandal on the Saints? Is there any Saints players you're going to stay away from because of this scandal? Drew Brees, you're obviously going to still want him. He's still one of the top 3 quarterbacks. But is there anybody in particular that this bounty scandal affects, on the Saints' fantasy value?
I think that you weren't going to draft their defense, and their defense is going to be in shambles. So I think it actually... strangely enough, might give everyone a slight uptick. And the reason why is that their defense is just going to be, it's gone. It's in shambles. A lot of guys suspended, defensive coordinator out, head coach not there for a while. So, organization, I just don't think it's happening. And they weren't a particularly great defense to begin with, but look, they're not going to, I just think they're going to be even worse this year. So, that means you're going to have an offense that's going to be in a lot of more shootout-type situations, which is really good for, the important players like the receivers, Drew Brees, Jimmy Graham, guys like Darren Sproles probably get an uptick. Probably a guy like Mark Ingram gets hurt by this because, you can't really run the ball as much in a shootout. So, he might get hurt a little bit, but, it's hard. It's kind of one of those things where you have to sort of let the weeks play out for... a week or two, and that to really understand what the implication of it's going to be. But I wouldn't really stay away from it. In fact, I think it gives them a little bit of an uptick.
Okay. Well, building on what Adam said, he's right. The defense is not what you're going to draft anyway, and the defense is going to be bad whether or not this had happened. So,
right.
In terms of that, making these things a shootout is only going to help Drew Brees. So I think that Drew Brees is going to have a great season again. I can't see I think people question his leadership because he's never really been called to really lead. He's always been more of a coach guy, unlike a Peyton Manning or a Tom Brady. But I think that he's going to show this year that he has exactly what everybody doubts. I mean, we're not seeing in that locker room, so I'm sure he's just as much of a leader as anybody else. I think that Drew Brees is going to have a great year, as I said. I think that the key players like Jimmy Graham and Marcus Colston, I think they're going to have good years this year. Marcus Colston, I think, is actually going to have a better year than he did last year because Robert Meacham's gone from the wide receiver corps.
True.
The bigger issue I have right now is with the issues in the coaching and the issues in that the running game. I think that the running game is going to suffer, and that includes Darren Sproles. I think that the loss of Carl Nicks is going to be huge on both the passing and the running game in terms of getting everything coordinated. You're not going to find a guard that's going to be as good as him to step in, and I think that that's going to affect the running game for both Sproles and Ingram and Pierre Thomas and anybody else they bring in there. I'd actually downgrade all of the running game players a little bit from what people think. Darren Sproles is probably the least because he's more involved in the passing game.
True.
But Mark Ingram and Pierre Thomas, I wouldn't draft them, or if I would, I'd do it very low. I think that the key players, Brees, Graham, don't shy away from them for a second. I think they're going to be stellar this year. You're going to see another amazing season from them. Yeah,
they still get to play on turf. They still have a really great home crowd, and they still have Drew Brees. So, it obviously might affect them winning, but we're not talking about winning football games. We're talking about fantasy football here. So, just follow what we're saying, and hopefully...
Yeah, I mean,
hope for the best.
In terms of real life, I think the Saints are going to have trouble, but that's not going to make any difference when it comes down to, on paper points. So
good thing we don't care about real life in the fantasy corner here.
Well, everyone knows that fantasy football is more important, right?
So much
That's
better.
true. Unless you're a Saints fan.
Unless you're a Saints fan.
Hey.
So this next question we have is a very interesting one. It's the Johnson question, and it's not what you think. It's about Chris, Andre, and Chad. How do you think that they will be able to respond to their current situations?
Okay. Well, first off, I'll just take this one Johnson at a time. You should never handle more than one Johnson.
It's a rule I live by.
I tried to once, and then well for me.
So I'm going to start with the least important of the Johnsons, Chad Johnson.
Oh.
Previously known as Ocho Cinco, but he changed his name recently, so we can call him by his original. I think that Chad Johnson is going to have another disappointing year. Will it be as disappointing as the Patriots? No, because I think they're going to rely on him a little more than they did.
That's possible.
I think they're going to rely on him a little more than they used to. But do I think that he's going to return to Bengals form, or not even Bengals form, but Ocho Cinco,
pre-name change
form? No, I think he's going to, you're going to see maybe a number 3 or flex player at best out of this guy, even though he's going to be the number 1 receiver in that offense. Because David Garrard and Matt Moore, I don't trust them to put up solid numbers every week, and honestly, their entire team's going to be in shambles this year.
Oh, yeah.
And Chad Johnson has lost a step. He's not the player he used to be. We saw that a lot with the Patriots last year. Now, is he going to have 15 catches and 150 yards and change or 200 yards? No, he's going to have 600, 700 yards maybe. But I don't think he's going to be a 1,000-yard, 10-touchdown guy.
He's not going to be what Brandon Marshall was. He's not going to...
Hey, you got to remember this. He does run a mean out route.
He does, yeah. So if all
textbook
else fails,
out route.
It's a great out route.
Right, so moving on to the next Johnson, Andre. Andre Johnson is an interesting kind of player because he's been so amazing. He's been so such a freakish athlete.
Right up there with Calvin.
And then last year he had so many issues with his injuries. He was on and off the field, wasn't putting up production. Schaub always is injury prone, so you have questions at quarterback, and even with everyone thought last year was going to be kind of a really big year for him with Arian Foster having just broken out the year before. Sure. So now people aren't just focusing on Andre, and he had the worst season of his career where he actually played, and a lot of people are questioning whether he comes back from that. I think that he does to a degree, but I think that he's lost a lot. He's getting old. I think he probably lost a lot of what he used to be. I think you're still going to see a solid fantasy starter guy. I don't think you're going to see a top 3 wide receiver like you saw. He's going to be top 10, maybe top 8. I don't think, but he's definitely lost a little bit of where he was, and I think when you draft him, you should take that into consideration. Although, from what I've seen in the fantasy drafts, a lot of the values are, fairly accurate. He's worth a lot less than say Larry Fitzgerald or Calvin. And now for the last Johnson we're going to talk about, Chris Johnson. he kind of went into training camp last year, held out, showed up late, late, and then he wasn't really in shape. And for the first couple of games, he was putting up garbage numbers.
Right.
But what people don't really think about is that for the next 8 games of the season, the last 8 games of the season, he was pretty good.
Yes.
He kind of came back to form, but no one really knew because his fantasy season was already garbage. I think what you're going to see from Chris Johnson after a full off season, happy Chris Johnson is a happy Titans team, and I think that he's going to be right back to form. I think he's going to be top 5 fantasy running back this year, and he's going to be explosive. He's going to be that guy who can win you those games, and he's a little bit undervalued in the draft, so he's a good guy to look at, good guy to pick up, and I think that he is going to win a lot of people their league this year if they get him for a good deal.
Now, I pretty much know what you're going to say here, but which Johnson do you want on your team the most?
Which Johnson would I want? Definitely Chris Johnson. I think he's probably the best valued and going to have the biggest impact as a player.
All right. Sounds good. How about you, sir?
Well, let's take it Johnson by Johnson here. Chad Johnson. I don't think he could have performed any worse than he did last year. He was a guy who just couldn't understand the playbook, couldn't get on the field, couldn't do anything for you. This year, he's number 1 wide receiver, but look who he's got throwing to him. Look at this. He has there's an okay rushing attack there though, but there's just so many question marks. If you want to pick him up for $1, I think you're wasting $1. You can I would pick this guy up on the waiver wire if he starts doing well, but I'm just not touching him. Sorry.
Agreed.
A guy like Andre Johnson. Okay, here's the thing. Andre Johnson, big name recognition, beast. Guy has all the physical tools you would want in a wide receiver, and in my mind, still top 5 guy. But like Prev said, he had the injuries last year. Matt Schaub, a little bit injury prone himself. They still have to feed Arian Foster and Ben Tate. They can't just ignore those guys. Those guys are going to get touches too. And he doesn't get a lot of help because he's never really had a great kind of second receiver to take a little bit of pressure off him. And, those guys can take away stats, but those guys help you out too because you don't see a few less double coverages, a few less low safeties over the top. Those things help you in fantasy, and he doesn't get any of that. He just gets a lot of double teams, and he has to work really, really hard to get his numbers. That being said, I still look for him to be a kind of a top 5 guy. Definitely, the injuries, they are a little bit risky, and certainly there is that a little bit of bust factor there if you think about it, because you're going to be spending first round picks on him. About $50 of money on him probably if you're looking at a lot of ESPN auctions. So definitely some bust factor there, especially if he's a guy who blows out his hamstring in week 8 and then just won't come back. Well, that's $50 down the toilet. So that's a little bit scary there. CJ, Chris Johnson, CJ 2K, or CJ's okay as it was last year. This guy, who do you really think he is? Do you really think he's a guy who showed up out of shape last year, contract holdout, all that nonsense, didn't play behind a very good O-line, didn't have a very good season, obviously, but we know what he is capable of. He's still a young guy. He's got a little bit more stability in his own life, and a little bit more. I think they picked up, Steve Hutchinson for the O-line. A little bit more stability there too. Look, they're not a great team in Tennessee, but I think they're going to be leaning on him a lot. He's still certainly a top-tier running back. Yes, he has risk. I understand it because you saw the history there last year. But if he lives up to anything close to his potential, then you're gonna get a running back who will really help you in fantasy this year. And you're probably gonna get him at, like Prev said, a slight discount. Especially against other running backs like a Shady McCoy and Arian Foster and RMZD.
Favorite Johnson?
Definitely. This year, I would definitely want Chris Johnson.
Okay.